everybody, and welcome to the third episode of my new feminist podcast, From You to Me, The Voices of Woman Up. This podcast will be discussing fresh views surrounding the very powerful and still very important topic of feminism, and specifically the concept of Woman Up, which is the brand created by myself. This message of Woman Up encompasses and celebrates feminism through the feelings of inner strength, glamour, confidence in oneself, overcoming obstacles and going forward with power to create equality. In each episode of the podcast, I'll be interviewing a special guest on their view of feminism to discover their feelings on the subject and if feminism has influenced their life and if they feel that Generation Z specifically need to woman up. Today, I would like to welcome the amazing woman who is Professor Emma Rees.
Hi, Anna.
Emma is a Professor of Literature and Gender Studies at the University of Chester and is Programme Leader of the Master's Gender Studies course here at Chester. Outside of teaching, Emma is the curator of the Talking Bodies project and has released a number of published works which focus on gender and representation, and she's currently working on her third book, That is a Feminist Issue. Thank you, Emma, for being here today and for taking the time to come on the podcast. It's very much appreciated, so thank you very much.
No problem at all, Anna.
Thank you. So if we can get started on the first question. The first question that I would really like to ask is, what does being a feminist mean to you? When and why did this identification as a feminist begin? Was there a specific point in time that sparked the feeling in you, or has it always been a very natural feeling for you?
I think that's a really good question. I grew up as an only child in a single parent household raised by my mum, and that meant that, of course, children sort of assume that what they're used to is what everybody's kind of experiencing. So for me, I just assumed that women could run households, raise children, do everything kind of on their own. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a specific click moment. There wasn't a moment where I thought, gosh, I'm absolutely a feminist. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't actually until I got into the workplace in my sort of mid-20s that I started seeing what I rapidly came to realise was actually discrimination. Mm-hmm. And that came as quite a shock. And I guess it's sort of testament to my mum that it never really struck me until my mid-20s. I could see what was going on in the world, I could see injustice and I could see inequality, mm-hmm. but I never thought that I would be held back because of my gender, because of my identity, until that started happening in the workplace.
Okay, and when you saw it in the workplace, how did that make you feel? How was that almost a turning point? Was it a turning point almost?
Okay, but yeah, I suppose it was, in that I realised that my work and my research and my writing, my career, were so inherently connected to my sense of self. So when I was, for example, not successful in a promotion competition, somebody else was, a man was, I realised that my academia was also very activist and was also very political. So when I was rejected, it was actually a whole ideology that was being rejected. And so I rapidly came to realise that I had to continue to live by that ideology, to be feminist, in order to make progress.
Definitely. And almost, did it almost train you almost to think in a different way? Almost to the way that you had been previously?
I don't know that it was different so much as kind of consolidation of everything that I'd experienced for the first 20 odd years. Suddenly I realised how privileged I'd been, how lucky I'd been, that I had assumed that I wouldn't experience obstacles. So when I started experiencing them in the workplace, I rapidly had to kind of call on all my reserves, everything I'd learned and up to that point, in order to understand what was going on.
It's definitely, and I suppose it's that took your research almost in a different direction, did it?
I think the research carried on in the same direction, but I realised that I could carve out a place for myself in academia that would have equality in gender at its centre, rather than my job being something that was separate from myself. So in a way, I was kind of realising that what I was seeing in my research was also something that was absolutely a real world problem. And that idea of the real world applicability of academia is one that is still incredibly important to me.
Definitely. And so you would definitely say that having the very established career that you've had, and a very established bank of work, this has definitely shaped your sense of self and your sense of outlook on life, and almost seeing this discrimination in reality almost as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. For me, my sort of academic career ended up being quite hard won, but I did sort of succeed in my own terms, and I rapidly saw how other people, not just at my university, but in the workplace more generally, more broadly, quite often would get into positions of success or power, or would achieve things and not use that as a way of helping other people to do the same. There's that phrase about pulling up the ladder, and I saw that happening a lot. So in other words, people getting to certain positions, obtaining certain rewards or privileges, but not being interested in sharing those or in helping other people to do it. And I've always hated injustice and inequality and exclusion, and so I very firmly leave the ladder down. It feels very important to me to do that.
I 100% agree, and it's almost that holding, once you've got to a position that you're very proud of and you're very happy with, it's almost that position of paying it forward and opening the door for others, be that women or men. I feel like it's equally important, but especially for women, helping them up and always having the door open for them.
Yes, and I think one of the things that we socialise our daughters into particularly is not to occupy space, whether that's literal in terms of our physicality, whether it's in terms of the way we present and the clothes that we wear, whether it's how we sit, how we speak. We're meant to be good girls, we're meant to be quiet, we're meant to be kind of closed down and shut in. And actually, you get an awful lot of flack when you refuse to be sort of shut down and shut in. And it's about creating a space where other women can also occupy space rather than feeling they have to be quiet or timid or be good girls. I think we've had enough of being good girls. We need to be naughty girls now.
Definitely. And the feeling that we don't have to be what for so many years society has almost trained us in a way to be. It's that subversion of the stereotypical norm, if you will, and being loud and proud about who we are and getting to where we want to be. And I think it's so important, but I think change is very much being made, but I think a very large part of it comes from, I think, nature versus nurture, and whether your life experiences have had an impact in wanting to be the confident self, or if the way that you genuinely feel inside has had an impact on this.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, Anna, that you talk about nature versus nurture there, because so often people do resort to the language of nature. So girls are naturally more, dainty or graceful or pretty. Boys are naturally more handsome and outgoing and active, and actually there's no nature in that. There's no naturally. It is about socialization. It is about nurturing. And so when somebody like you comes along with this incredible brand of Woman Up and wants to change that, actually it's a massive task, because you're talking about turning around generations of socialization that have become so solidified that people now think it is actually nature. It's not, and we can change it.
Definitely. I think it's so important, and I think with feminism being such a a very broad topic, I think a lot of people are aware, people are aware of it, but I think it takes a lot for people to actually say, oh, actually, yes, this needs to be talked about, and this needs to change. Because a lot of people that I've spoken about, and everyone's got their own opinions on it, and that's absolutely fine, but a lot of people are like, oh yeah, feminism, cool, almost like a bit not afraid to talk about it, but a bit kind of like don't really understand it enough to be able to talk about it fully. Whereas, and it's that educating people that actually, this is, we need it, and it's not something that should just be okay. It's very, very important, and it is challenging, but it's very, very rewarding, I found.
Oh yeah, I have to agree with you, and it's really heartening for me being in my generation and hearing somebody from your generation talking about how important feminism still is, because I do think that it's currently incredibly fractured, incredibly broken, and I think it's got a bad rep, and I think that's in many ways deserved. So the fact that somebody like you is coming along and kind of saying that actually we need to breathe new life into this is really important. So well done you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a brilliant learning experience, and so I started my experience and my research and my contextualization of Woman Up by looking at historical movements and these brilliant, brave, inspirational women who have paved the way forward for us, and we cannot forget about them. We can't forget about these women and men, but specifically women of the past who have kind of really kickstarted feminism and brought us to where we are now. So that's where my understanding has evolved from and has grown the more and more that I've researched into it, and the more I've spoken to people, and the more that my own sense of self has grown. So how, from your perspective, how do you feel feminism has changed and adapted over the years? And obviously the feminist space is still quite broken at the minute. Do you feel like this change, this huge change that we've been on, do you feel like it's been for better or for worse as to where we are now?
I think that the division between the haves and the have-nots on a global scale has become more entrenched. And anybody in the global north or the Western world, however you want to call it, who talks about not needing feminism anymore is coming from a position of extreme privilege. Because, they may be absolutely fine. They may not need feminism, but their very ability to occupy a platform, usually a digital platform, to be able to say, I don't need feminism, has been bought on the backs of countless feminists who've come before, saying, actually, we need to give women a platform and a voice. And also, those same women who say we don't need feminism don't acknowledge that actually just because they don't doesn't mean that globally other women don't. And I think there are two issues that for me absolutely stop feminism being a coherent political movement at the moment. And one of those is trans rights, and one of them is around sex workers and sex workers' rights. Funnily enough, we're having this interview today on International Trans Day of Visibility, and it is still just baffling to me how many people who call themselves feminists are actually exclusionary. So they don't want trans women to be part of the feminist movement, and I just find that quite perverse and strange. For me, a trans woman is a woman, and there's no doubt or hesitation in my mind. And then obviously we're also having this conversation under the very bizarre global pandemic situation of COVID-19, and I think that one group who've fallen through the cracks in all of this planning are sex workers. I really think that matters, because sex workers, yes, we can make all sorts of jokes about how they can work from home, but actually, for many sex workers, they, as one might imagine, rely on intimate contact with strangers, and that's exactly what the whole dominant discourse of government and everybody is telling us we shouldn't be doing. So many sex workers are suffering even more in the current climate, both economic and in terms of the pandemic. So I think until feminism can provide a sort of unified front, particularly on those two issues of trans rights and sex workers' rights, the patriarchy, however one may choose to define that, the big power structures will just sort of take it, lean back in their chairs and light a cigar and sort of say, you carry on, ladies, and let us know, when you're done infighting. While we're infighting, there are 200 million women on this planet who've had female genital mutilation performed on their bodies. And those are the kind of big issues that we have to address. Too often I hear people talking about feminism being about, should I wear makeup, can I wear heels, can I enjoy a hen party, all those sorts of things. And actually, do whatever you want, but just make sure you address the bigger, more difficult structural issues and questions.
Definitely, I think because so many people have so many different meanings of feminism, and it's almost as if, let's focus on the little unimportant things so we can brush the bigger issues under the rug, and so if we don't talk about these, maybe people will forget about them. Well, actually, no, that they're the important things that people need to be addressed in, and that change won't happen until we address these subjects. So people and females can do whatever they want, but it's what they feel and what they physically want to change, and how they practically go about doing that's important. And that's the importantness, not whether do I need to shave my legs. Well, nobody cares. It's what you feel and do that makes a difference, that's important.
One of the things I'm often saying to my students is to treat the world like a jumper with a loose piece of wool, and tug on that little thread on that piece of wool and see what unravels, because actually power structures rely on us not saying, I wonder what happens if I press this button or pull this loose thread. I wonder what happens. And actually a lot of what we're led to believe is natural, like the class system, like capitalism, all of those massive structural issues are pretty shaky. Actually, once you start to sort of unravel them, they quickly fall to pieces. And I think, again, the global pandemic of COVID-19 is kind of teaching us that, because suddenly the government can house people in homeless shelters. They can find money to support workers. They can nationalise the railways. They can do all of those things that previously they said they couldn't do. So actually, I think it is quite an important kind of watershed moment that you've come in on with your project, because it is a time when all of those things that were formerly taken absolutely for granted are being shown to be a bit rickety, and that's good.
It is definitely. It's the when things are questioned and challenged, people actually see the transparency behind things, and actually the real truth becomes forward, doesn't it? And I feel this pandemic has definitely shown us a lot of kind of what's hidden behind these power structures, and when that's kind of shaken a little bit, things do come to the forefront, don't they?
Yes. Yeah.
And leading on from that, I feel like within the within the female community itself, and not just men and not just patriarchal systems, but within different females themselves, every single generations of females seem to have their own different meaning of feminism. So for example, the older generation of of women, they kind of may have one view of feminism, and younger generation who have kind of been brought up in this social media and digital landscape, they have a different kind of meaning and interpretation of feminism, and kind of I feel like the main meaning and the main feeling of power and equality has somehow got lost in translation between all of that.
I would caution, though, Anna, against talking about generations of feminism in terms of age. I think generations is an acceptable way of talking about it. But actually, there are lots of middle-aged women, for example, who are totally at home using digital media and so on, and also many sort of Generation Zs who aren't at home with that. So I think it's not about age, it's about circumstance, it's about occupation, it's about where you live and how you live, and what your job is, and all those sorts of things. But yes, where you're absolutely right is that there are lots of different kind of groups staking their territory in terms of feminism, and they're not always communicating properly with each other, and that means again that it's not a coherent political movement.
Definitely. And I think until it is, I think the space is always going to be broken. And coming in from a different angle, slightly, I feel, especially within the kind of the fashion industry, obviously the fashion industry is huge. It's one of the world's leading industries and the fashion industry has got a lot of influence over everyone, and I feel like they too have a very strong very strong part to play in how they teach people about equality and how they teach people about acceptance and feminism. And how, from your perspective, how do you feel about feminism within the global fashion industry, and can you see that the cracks within that, because when I think of feminism in the fashion industry, I think of, okay, brilliant, Dior are sending, you know, t-shirts down the catwalk that says, oh, we shall be feminist, but I'm thinking beyond that. I'm thinking, you know, other women workers, are they getting fair pay? Are they being treated equally? Are they being treated well? Have they got equal rights? And so I'm thinking of everything behind that rather than from face value. How do you feel about that?
I think that's crucial, and I think that what Woman Up appears to be doing is absolutely sort of engaging with those structural issues around fashion, because there is, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said if every woman suddenly woke up tomorrow and decided she was completely happy with her appearance, the whole sort of fashion and beauty industry would just
absolutely
crumble.
Fall apart. It would.
Yeah. So there's always this kind of aspirational role that fashion has had. You know, you can be more beautiful, and beautiful usually means white, able-bodied, heterosexual, young, all of those things that most people actually aren't. So I think that the new sort of ethical model of fashion, as you say, thinking about, well, I've got this t-shirt that says this is what a feminist looks like, but at the same time there's somebody in a clothing factory in Bangladesh who is in fear of the fact that they don't have fire regulations, so the building could burn down, who's making the t-shirt. For me to say, oh yes, I think feminism's great, we have to join the dots and we have to see that bigger picture in the way that you've just described. But I also think that actually there is a lot that fashion can do now in terms of representation. In other words, how they sell back to us an image of how we, in inverted commas, ought to look. And the way that comes about is through diversity. So the more models we have who aren't white, who aren't able-bodied, who aren't behaving in a sort of heteronormative way, who aren't youthful, the more we go against those dominant ideologies of what beauty and fashion are, the more change we can make. So I think that it's a bit like turning an oil tank around. It's a massive job, but actually I do see some sort of source of optimism. I think things can change, and I think the industry can become far more ethical.
I completely agree. I think as long as the product of what fashion brands are selling is correct, then I feel like that's, you know, we've got a lot of influence. And yeah. I feel like because we soak in fashion from everything that we do, you know, that's, you know, fashion really needs to, and these big brands, specifically luxury brands, who really need to kind of almost not change, but perhaps adapt the way that they market themselves and the products that they sell for the high street and fast fashion brands and these, you know, lesser specific brands to then think, oh, actually, if the luxury brands are doing that to be educational, then we need to do that, and because they have obviously fast fashion brands have a lot more reach to so many more people, than a lot more accessible than luxury brands. That's when the message can spread much more quickly, I feel.
Yes, absolutely. I saw a very good film recently before the cinemas were closed called Greed, and it has Steve Coogan in, who is playing a kind of Philip Green Arcadia group kind of character, making his money off fast fashion. And at the end of that film, I won't give any spoilers, but at the end of it, as the credits are rolling, they have a series of statistics about factory fires, about the women who work on the machines in Bangladesh and in the Indian subcontinent more broadly. And it's a real sort of wake-up call, because you think, gosh, yes, we have got this fast fashion, we have got these people becoming incredibly rich on it, and we have sort of indoctrinated a generation of people to believe that they have to have this particular kind of fashion and they have to have it now. But actually, again, that's not how things have to be. And it's incumbent upon those of us who don't mind kind of taking up space to keep saying, actually, no, it doesn't need to be like that. I was very struck as well in terms of the current pandemic that I think it's Armani have recently turned one of their factories over to making equipment for medical personnel. And I found that really fascinating. It's almost like they suddenly saw that the real world, you know, meant that they were kind of slightly anachronistic and they had to do something to contribute. And I think that's only positive, really.
Definitely, 100% agree. Definitely. And
I mean, obviously, it would be nice if were it not a pandemic and people dying that led people to reassess the situation. Obviously, it'd be much better were that not the case. But Perhaps there is a glimmer of a small silver lining in all of this.
Definitely, and it's like going back to the government and patriarchal systems. It takes the one thing to just shake it slightly, and things can be so much different, and and things can be much more transparent, and these great structural devices can be changed, and people can change their ideas and interpretations of them for the better.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And with specifically talking about in the workplace, and with and factories and female workers in factories, have you yourself specifically witnessed anything like, so have you ever witnessed any kind of key moment of gender inequality, or a key moment of gender equality within a workplace that kind of ever really shines out to you, be that inequality or very strong equality in a workplace?
That's such a good question, because often one gets asked about inequality but rarely about equality, so that's really nice. In terms of inequality, first of all, I've worked at the University of Chester for over 20 years now. I started here in 1999, and over that time I've been a PAT, a personal academic tutor, to probably hundreds if not thousands of students. And there's one particular pressure point in the academic year which is beginning to change, much to my relief, and that is around Freshers' Week. What happens there is you get a lot of young people, often coming away from living at home for the very first time, coming together, and the whole sort of culture of TV programmes and films and what they've heard on social media, etc., means that they have certain expectations about what Freshers' Week should be like. And I've seen numerous young women who've been what I would call sexually assaulted, but they don't necessarily see it in those terms. But also numerous young men who have been really quite sort of shaken by how they've been expected to behave. Suddenly this sort of laddish culture. Now, this is something that I've seen absolutely changing over the past, I'd say, 5 years. Issues around consent, issues around sexual assault, ideas about masculinity and about being one of the lads, all of those things have really kind of come to the fore, and I think that's a really good thing. But it did trouble me deeply, because of course feminism is about equality, and this sort of throwaway phrase about toxic masculinity is actually a really useful phrase, because I think there are many young men who perhaps have grown up in families without a male role model, who've perhaps been to school without very many male teachers, and who think that there's a certain way that they ought to behave and act. And if they don't want to behave or act like that, then they're the outliers, and they feel that they're not sort of manning up sufficiently. And that leads to all sorts of pretty tragic consequences. So I think in terms of what my workplace, the university, has done particularly, is really say to people, there's no set way to behave in Freshers' Week anymore. And of course, once you've got young people to kind of understand that, they then find their place in the university much more comfortably. They can be more authentic to themselves. And something that Chester particularly does really well is to support people in their difference and, in terms of their individual needs.
Definitely.
In my own working life, I'm on the union executive at the University and Colleges Union. I'd say to anybody entering any workplace, always unionise, always join a union, because there you will have other people who understand the inequalities of any workplace. I was passed over for promotion in favour of men who were less well qualified than me. They're both the ones I'm thinking of have left the university now, happily, so I can talk about it, who I was told that I would need X, Y and Z. They would come along, they didn't have X, Y and Z, and yet they were promoted. And I saw that happening, and it took me something like 4 or 5 goes to get to become professor. And it was only because I wrote a book, my second book, which was called The Vagina, A Literary and Cultural History, that sold really well and got reviewed, that suddenly they couldn't ignore me anymore. And that's that kind of thing that we were talking about earlier about taking up space. The book became such a kind of presence to them that they couldn't not see it, they couldn't not read the reviews, they couldn't not acknowledge its existence. But I still, even once that happened, I got male colleagues again telling me it wasn't serious research, that it shouldn't be taken seriously, it wasn't somehow proper, and all of that kind of nonsense. So yeah, there have been real frustrations, and it's only now that I've got my professorship and I've been here for 20 years and I know how it works and I'm on the union, that I can sort of put my head above the parapet and call out these inequalities to what they are. But I've got a great sort of feeling of optimism about the university. We've been an institution for 180 years, and yet only now have we got a woman at the sort of helm, with our first female vice-chancellor. So I do sense that things have changed over the last 5 years, and I feel that they are still changing for the better.
Definitely, and things are moving forward, aren't they? Things are moving slowly but surely forward, for the better. Definitely.
Yeah, I hope so.
And I think part of it is because I feel that younger generations, I feel like, are perhaps growing up with a very good sense of acceptance, I feel, for people. And I feel like this, for my generation specifically, and everyone, people that I'm friends with in my own community, we're all very, very accepting with, gender and sexuality and feminism and equality. We're all very, as I feel like, speaking on behalf of of my own community, we are very accepting. I feel that's translates over a whole generation that are being brought up to be a lot more open and a lot more aware and a lot more able to challenge situations that aren't specifically normal and aren't afraid to subvert stereotypes. And I feel like that's absolutely brilliant and it's wonderful. And I feel like so many people brand Generation Z as an almost a snowflake generation, as an umbrella term for it, I feel like perhaps some people are, but I feel like that could be said for anybody. But I feel like my generation are very, very passionate about very important things and do want to make the change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I sort of pulled you up slightly earlier, talking about generations, but you're absolutely right, because you are the first generation that has always had the internet there. My generation obviously didn't for sort of 30 years, the first 30 years of my life. So you have, I think, got the world on your doorstep, and I think part of that means that you do, as you've already said, understand feminism and gender and sexuality differently, even from the sort of tail end of Generation X, which is my generation. And I think that there is a kind of openness that I see in my students. I do think that with that sort of world on the doorstep in terms of technology, there's a degree of kind of privilege and responsibility. There's kind of obligation, I think, because your generation can't pretend that stuff isn't happening anymore, because it's right there on social media.
It can't be ignored. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, and I do think that the whole climate change, Extinction Rebellion kind of model is one that fills me with optimism, because it does suggest that important issues can be brought to people's attentions quite widely. And it also proves that Generation Z does actually take important stuff seriously. The snowflake name is used by people who are pretty afraid and feel pretty insecure, I think. And I do think that for people like that, if you're accustomed to the privilege that many Generation X, for example, have, then equality starts to feel pretty oppressive. And so there's a kind of, it's easier to bandy names around and to label the snowflake generation. But actually, as long as Generation Z listens and learns and does their research, and that can be, using the internet as well, sorts out proper news from inverted commas fake news, then I have massive optimism that they can move feminism forward in sort of exciting and productive ways, and they can change the world. So, but it's going to take that kind of recognition of their privilege, much as we all have to recognise our privilege, and also a global way of thinking. You know, the world is a very small place now because of the internet.
Definitely.
And we do have a responsibility to know how other people's lives are in other parts of the world. We also have a responsibility to call out people that say, for example, we don't need feminism anymore, because they're coming from a position of ignorance that is very easily remedied with 2 clicks on a phone or on a mouse.
Definitely. I think these people that brand themselves as anti-feminists are just very cruel. I feel as a word, cruel and ignorant. And
but ignorance isn't necessarily cruelty, is it? Because isn't ignorance just not bothering to find out stuff?
Yes, yeah, it is.
Whereas cruel feels a kind of, there's a sort of intention behind that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, I mean, if you find out the stuff and then you decide to be anti-feminist, then clearly you are pretty cruel. But if you just haven't ever bothered really to think about it, if you haven't ever pulled at any of the loose threads of your own privilege or of the structures that dominate society,
that comes from a place of ignorance and
exactly,
just unwillingness to learn, educate yourself and understand and sympathise with people as well.
Yeah, and those are the people quite often who lack that empathy, who are the worst people on social media, Twitter particularly, which is a pretty... It's a wonderful place to be as a woman on the internet, but it's also a pretty grubby place and pretty unpleasant sometimes too.
Definitely. But I feel, Generation Z are aware of the constant fight, but I feel like we still need to be educated about the past and about the journey that we've come on in order to push that journey forward.
But it's that great phrase, isn't it, about those who don't understand the past are doomed to repeat it. And I think that's really very true. But I also think that with Woman Up, you're doing something in terms of sort of leading the vanguard in the sense of feminism for the 21st century, feminism for now. Where did that, what's the kind of key message that underpins Woman Up? Where did it come from as a concept for you?
So Woman Up is a phrase that I've always said to myself, so every time in the past in my life where I have been feeling kind of a bit down or kind of beating myself up for reasons that I shouldn't be, or just kind of needing to kick myself up the arse a little bit, I've always said, come on then, woman up, don't mind up, woman up, come on, we can do this, we've got this, stop being silly, come on, have the power and the strength in yourself to say, actually I can do this, I am confident, I am strong, woman up. So that has always been kind of an underlying narrative throughout my whole life, without me really knowing until recently. And I kind of opened up my mind a little bit, and I thought, actually, this is, even though this has been a subconscious feeling my whole life, why do I feel like this, and why, and how can I manifest this into something physical that I can then talk about and portray and help educate? So that's because I'd say that Woman Up is almost an extension of my personality, and so rather than it being a subconscious feeling now, it's it's a conscious physical movement that I want to really push in my life, in my personal life, and to try and help other people and almost inspire other people as well. And
for you, the glamour isn't incompatible with sort of female empowerment and confidence, is it? It seems that glamour is part and parcel of what Woman Up is.
It's an extension of it. So my version of glamour is feeling confident in yourself, however you are, and whatever makes you feel confident, to run with it. And so, for example, for me, I'm confident in myself anyway, but with my red lipstick, which is almost kind of an identifier of myself almost, that's kind of the little bit where I was like, right, I've got this. Like, it's almost like I can do anything. extra when I've got my red lipstick on. What I wouldn't, but I still am me, and I'm still Anna, and I'm still believing woman up, and everything who I am still am without the red lipstick. But that is kind of just a bit of a right. And I feel like it's that glamour is not just an external thing, not just a materialistic thing, but a very much of an inner feeling of glamour. And every woman has the right to feel confident in themselves and glamorous however they are, and that to be able for them to fill the space and to be vocal and to be everything that they wanted to be, and to push for where they want to be. And so that's where the inner feeling of glamour and confidence and strength, rather than just an external visual aesthetic almost.
I think that's fantastic. I think that's so empowering, and it is absolutely what the movement needs right now, I think.
Definitely, and that was my aim, to be kind of as empowering to everybody, to all ages, all genders, everybody, because I think it's a message that transcends everyone. So that's what I wanted to really encompass, and the ability to kind of to keep moving forward, and to not to use your whatever it is that makes you and run with it. Everyone's enhanced their own uniqueness to be whatever and however they want to be.
And what's rather lovely about that, of course, is that men can woman up. And in fact, if more men did woman up, they would actually, probably the world would be a better place.
Definitely.
Because it is about it's about authenticity, but it also sounds as though you're talking about a kind of diversity there, because I imagine that you also see representation as important. So the little girl who is perhaps a wheelchair user can look at glamorous models, and perhaps one of them might be using a wheelchair, and therefore she can kind of conceptualise of herself. Absolutely, in a different way to how she would previously. Oh, that's so important. It's the idea of not leaving anybody behind. I think Woman Up sounds like a brilliant way to do that. I'm hoping so.
And I feel like it's a big push for everyone, because I think everyone, all that whether people acknowledge it or not, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants equality. Everybody wants acceptance, and everybody wants and everybody wants inclusivity, whether people vocalize it or not. Everybody wants it. So it's getting everybody on that same understanding to move forward together, and to be confident together, and to not tear anybody else down, and so we can all move to the future and to make it a hopefully a very positive and progressive place. So that's the narrative behind Woman Up. So that's the aim, that's the fight, that's kind of my voice.
Good.
And so to kind of to conclude everything, and to circle kind of to sum and everything up, what future can you see for feminism? What would you like the feminist space to look like in, say, the next 5 years, and how do you feel like progression needs to be made, and what specific progression would you like to see?
I'd like to see this current bizarre pandemic moment continuing to have repercussions, but positive repercussions as we move forward into the next few years. One of the things that it's taught us is that illness and disease are great levelers. In other words, it doesn't matter what your gender is, what your rank is, how able-bodied you are, whether you're white, whether you're a person of colour, that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. And I think that when our Prime Minister became ill, it was a wake-up call for many people who thought, gosh, even for all his privilege and wealth and rank, he is still flesh and blood like the rest of us.
But nobody is untouchable.
Exactly. And I think that could be sort of framed in a positive way as we kind of move forward. Again, I'm not belittling the fact that this is a very serious phenomenon and people are dying. That matters, of course it does. But what I'm saying is, as particularly in the global north, particularly in the UK, we can kind of see that there have been wonderful moments of people moving together, bizarrely from isolation and not being actually to get together. So I think there is an opportunity for a kind of levelling out there, a kind of equality that could come from that. But we also need to remember that a disproportionate number of the sort of frontline workforce, by which I mean the teachers, the nurses, the cleaners, the catering staff working in hospitals, all of those people that keep the machinery of these big structures running, most of them are still women. Women disproportionately suffer when a crisis like this strikes, or when there's a budget, or when there's a policy of austerity, for example. So I think there are still those really big structural issues of inequality that need to be addressed. And I think we've got to keep tugging at those loose threads, because I think that the jumper is going to be knitted differently as we move forward, post-pandemic. But I think there will still be some loose threads that it's our duty to pull out, to see what unravels, and to expose power structures with any inequalities at their centre, because they still will be there, and some people will still be denied sort of access to power. Feminism's job is to try to make sure that everybody can find their own power, which is what you're doing with the Woman Up brand, but also find power politically, whether that's with a big P or with a small p. And feminism seems the only sort of sensible way to conceptualise the world post-pandemic.
Definitely. Definitely. I 100% agree. The more people question and challenge, change will be made. Slowly but surely we will get there. And until people stop talking about feminism, it's never going to be an issue that's solved. So it's continuing the ball rolling for everybody, and I think we will get there, and it will be good. And I think post pandemic, fingers crossed, the space will be adapted in a very positive light for everybody.
Well, let's hope so.
Definitely. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for talking to me. Thank you everybody for listening to the podcast, and a big thank you to Professor Emma Rees for coming on and sharing her very wise words with everybody. So thank you very much, Emma. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and I will see everyone in the next podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.